Well, I guess here we are. 5:28 Friday, 5 a.m. It has been weighing heavy on me lately that I need to, if I'm going to do anything, I need to be doing it now. Time passes and it's gone. It does not come back. And I've just lost so much time, and I've lost so much of my effort that I put into anything. What little effort I put into it, I've lost half of that. Or at least I feel as though I have. I have to record at night, or I am having to now. I should be able to record in the day, but I'm having to do it now. Not only because I'm awake at this time, but I just can't do it in the daytime right now. I don't even know what I am not prepared at all. I just thought I would make some kind of, I don't know, preliminary trial run at a statement of faith, the Timaean religion, the Timaean faith. Everything, well, to me it is the Christian religion. It is the true Christianity, the true form of Christianity. But to everybody else, it would just either be heretical or just plain crazy. But it basically, everything people accept as normal about Christianity is wrong. So you have to more or less reverse that to get the truth or the correct version of it. It's what it is. It's like the Protestant Reformation. It's like the Second Reformation. That's what we need. We need a Second Reformation. Because just as the First Reformation had the Christians separating from the Catholic Church because the Catholics had become completely erroneous in their doctrines, institutional, bureaucratic, and very, very worldly and very, very wrong. Well, so too now has the Protestant Church become the same thing. And they are equally wrong to what the Catholics were at that time. And so we need a Second Reformation. We've been sitting too long in these little country churches, and since the mid-20th century, the rise of the mega churches with thousands and thousands of people going to them. The bigger the church, the more wrong it is. But they would say I'm wrong, whereas immediately out of the gate they would say I'm wrong, because one of the prime doctrines, prime movers, prime concepts of the Reformation was the idea of sola scriptura. Whereas the Catholic Church goes by the dictates of the Pope. The Protestant group went by the Bible, what they claimed to be the Word of God, inerrant Word of God. But this, of course, led to many, many different denominations, all of them claiming to be the correct one, because they're all claiming to get it from the Bible, whereas the Catholics get it from papal decree. But I don't do either one of those. I don't, of course, follow any pope, and neither do I, well, obviously follow denominational teaching, but I do not use the Bible to get what I believe from. Long ago I asked God to teach me Himself directly, to cut out all the middlemen, cut out all the preachers, and cut out myself from it. I did not want to put myself in front of it by literally reading the Bible and coming up with my own opinion of it, and then having my own denomination. I wanted Him to show me the truth directly. And so you get into what they would call my first heresy, which is following the Spirit, what I call following the Spirit. They would consider it to be me just making it all up. But I consider myself to be an apostle, although I don't ever bring it up. It's not a big deal. It's just de facto, by definition, that's what it is. When Christ deals with somebody directly, when He teaches them directly, just like Paul. Paul was not there when Jesus was around, when He was alive, when He was teaching in Galilee and whatnot, and He had the disciples with Him. Paul was not there, yet he became an apostle. How was he an apostle? If he was not around when Christ was teaching. Well, that's because Christ taught him later in a different way, in a more personal way. That's why Paul's writings, Paul's teachings were so much different from the other apostles, because they all reverted back into Judaism, Hebrewism. If it weren't for Paul and his Hellenized ways, completely separated from Judaism altogether. The same as the Protestants did the Catholic Church, and the same as I have done the Protestants. We are always continually coming out of the world. As we follow the Spirit, the world is always continually left behind. And everybody becomes enamored with the tradition. They associate themselves with that tradition. They cannot let go of it, and they fall behind with it because they cannot follow the Spirit. They follow what essentially is carnality, which is their desire to hold on to the tradition. All it is the vanity of man. But I wanted God to teach me Himself. And so that is what I have followed, what I call the Spirit. As such, I have not gone to the Bible as my primary source of doctrine, but I would say secondary source. Basically, the point is the Bible has become outdated. And I would like to write a third testament, or a second Bible, if I could ever get around to it. But a big chunk, a good chunk of the Bible that we have, the Hebrew Bible, is not historically accurate. People, Christians especially, cannot handle that. They will not agree with that. like I said, consider it to be the inerrant Word of God, especially Protestants. It cannot have any fault to it at all. And that is not how I see it. I see it as very flawed. Flawed by the hands of man, if nothing else. All I know is God gives us the truth. He shows us the way. He doesn't make the way easy. He doesn't make it perfect. He doesn't roll out the red carpet. He doesn't download all the information of the universe into your brain. He shows you what he shows you, and the rest is your brain fills in the gaps, let's say. None of us are perfect. We don't have infinite knowledge. We have insight. I believe the Bible was written by inspired people, by people following the Spirit, just like I do. They were not referring to any Bible. They weren't referencing any Bible. Their work, the people who wrote the Bible, were not referring to anything before them. They were writing as the authority. Therefore, their work is not derivative. It's not coming from something else. Just like me, if I were to write something about it, it's not derivative. It's coming from me. It's not, oh, well, Paul said this and so said that. That's not what I'm doing. I am writing what God has shown me. And that is just as what the writers, the authors of the Bible were doing at their time. Even in the New Testament, they would refer to the Old Testament, but they were not dependent on the Old Testament. They were writing what God showed them then. It was new. Anyway, so I have learned that the Bible is not inerrant at all. And so my beliefs are not dependent on the Bible to stand. I do not need the Bible to believe what I believe. Only certain key points that are referenced in the Bible, such as, for example, Christ atoning for us. That would be one of the things that has to be there. But something like Christ at the age of 12 going into the temple and talking with the rabbis there, that is not necessary. That does not have to be true. That is just something that is said about Christ as a child. Or Moses, for example. A person that served as the function of Moses, who was given the law, you can say that person existed somewhere in history, and was given some form of the law, the original form, which is not the final form. But that historical character is there. But the story about him being put into a basket as a baby and floated down the river Nile, and with a woman of the Pharaoh's house picking him up out of the river, that doesn't have to be true. That's just a story. Same thing with Abraham or any of the others. Abraham had to have existed for there to even be a covenant in the first place. Without Abraham, there is no Bible. Just like without Christ, there is no Bible. There's no point. Abraham was the beginning of the covenant, and Christ was the ending of the covenant. Those 2 points have to be there. Somebody that served the function of Abraham had to be there. But he didn't have to be called Abraham. He was from a city in Babylon. They say Ur. That doesn't have to be the one. It could be whatever city. Certain things have to be true, but not every little thing. And this is where Christians fall. They stumble because they are holding their faith to ink on a page, as if their God is dependent on letters in a book to be real. Anyway, so that is the first thing. I do not go by the Bible. I go by the Spirit. I don't know what the best way to be. I have read the various statements of faith, or so-called confessions of faith, and they're itemized, or they're assorted in different ways, chapter by chapter, topic by topic. The whole idea of systematic theology. But in my mind, for whatever reason, he has made it to where I work. My brain just thinks in terms of chronology. So instead of itemized or referenced by topic like an encyclopedia, which I would not. I don't like that. But my mind works in terms of chronology, because it's just a flow of time. That is history. Everything, so much of it, it all just kind of goes together. Like salvation. Salvation is tied to the nature of Christ. The nature of Christ is tied to the nature of God. The nature of God is tied to the nature of creation. And it's all just part of the same thing, really. And so when you have all these topics of theology, whether it's soteriology or eschatology or any of these names, by itemizing it and reducing it to topical notes and headings, they're by definition separating these into different distinct parts. They're categorizing it, and by separating it they are reducing its complexity and simplifying it to a point where it actually loses definition, and they lose the meaning by trying to over-define it and over-explain it. And they actually cause it to mean less than it does as a whole, so that the sum of the parts is actually less than the whole, the way they add it up. And I would say I have a much more holistic approach. So the sum of the parts is always more than the total. Anyway, so like I said, I don't even have any notes in front of me. I'm just sitting here with the computer screen, and I've got the lights out. I don't even have the light on. And without any plan, or no planning ahead here, I just thought I would hit record and start talking, and just try to get some kind of preliminary framework that I can maybe use later to keep refining and adding to, and just getting some foundation here for things. Because I'll need to end up writing this out, typing it out, and making a book out of it. If I'm ever going to do anything, I need to get this out. But typing things out, and that's much different. That's a different dynamic than just talking. So I wanted to talk and just see what comes up. So many times I wished I could record myself. Just anytime I try to record myself, it never comes out the same way as when I'm not recording and I'm just talking. And then some kind of stream of consciousness happens, and a bunch of stuff comes out, but I'm not recording. And then of course you turn on you turn the recording on, and then there's no stream of consciousness, and it's not the same. And the same is true with writing, because that's a whole different. That's metered, and how you are writing, you are restricted to a certain cadence of your typing. The nature of God. God is not contained within the cosmos. God is without. He's outside of all creation. He's not made of anything. He does not consist of anything. I remember one time I was in church, and before it started, someone went up to Jim and asked him what God is made of. Jim didn't have an answer for him. In fact, he thought it was kind of a dumb question, but only because Jim didn't have an answer. And after he had asked this question, he then he came back and he sat down next to me, and I told him, God isn't made of anything. He's made of nothing. And to be perfectly honest, and the way that we define reality and what makes something exist, and technically speaking, God does not exist, because he does not consist of anything to exist with. He just is. There is no outside parameter for him to exist within. We exist within creation. That's why we exist. We are here because there is a greater world to contain us in. There is no such place to contain God. God is not contained. Everything that exists, he has to make it. He's not made of anything. So he does not exist in any comparable way to anything else that he creates. He's completely and totally separate from it. And for anybody that thinks that anything existing in creation that has a form, a physical form, an appearance, a voice, whatever, anything that you can experience is part of creation, and therefore is not the creating God. And so people have a hard time. It's just like the Aborigines and the primitive peoples would carve statues out of wood or statues out of stone to represent their gods, or in some cases they would fashion an item and think that that was the god. The same is true of people who think God has to exist inside reality, inside creation. He has to consist of something. He has to have an appearance. The idea that God has to have an appearance is not, it's basically the same. It's not much better, and in my opinion it's basically the same as the old primitives who had to make a statue to represent their god with. And they would worship the god or leave offerings for the statue. That's the same mental construct, the same mental thought process going on there. It serves the same mental function as having the idea of a physical God in your mind existing out there somewhere who has an appearance and has a voice. That's the same. That serves the same purpose in your mind as it does to carve a little statue out and sit it on the shelf and say that represents God to you. God does not have a form. Cannot. He literally cannot have a form. If he creates it, it is something that is made, and it is not him. Which brings us to Christ, which is exactly that. It is a vehicle for him to express himself to us in this creation where we are. It's fairly simple, but like I said, people, they either overcomplicate it or they oversimplify, and either way they mess it up. There is no Trinity. There's only one God, and it really only serves one function. There's no triune anything. There's no Trinity in the Bible, certainly not in the Old Testament. The parts in the Old Testament where God is spoken of in plural, it's talking about old pagan pantheon, mostly the Ugaritic pantheon, the Phoenician pantheon. Especially in Genesis, where it uses Elohim. That directly is referring to the Ugaritic pantheon. A lot of that's taken from the Babylonian creation myth, which has been well known. So this vehicle, this persona of Christ, actually is Yahweh. Yahweh is not the creator God. He is Jesus, who is a created being used, as I said, to interact with us. So it's very clear how that functions. I would say, although it's just an assumption, that he was created at the beginning, at the very beginning, like the first thing to be made, you know, the primum, the primordial cosmos would have him in it. There would never be a time in existence in which he does not exist inside this creation, I would say. So that in terms of the eternum, or how long this creation has been around, Christ has always been in it, and will be as long as it exists. But that does not negate the fact that he is a created being, made to exist within it. However, that is not expressly known by me that he was created at that time. It just seems logical that he would have been. The creation of that being would be synonymous with the creation of the cosmos itself. Even John said that when he said, without him was not anything made that was made. When the opening of John, one of my favorite parts in the Bible, the first chapter of John, where he's actually equating that, he's referencing Genesis is what he's doing, the creation in Genesis, only he's bringing Christ into it, saying Christ did the creating. The problem with the Trinity, well, there are many problems with the Trinity, but where people go wrong, I can see how they get two separate beings out of Jesus and the Creator God, which I refer to as Elion, by the way. That's the name I apply to him. But that's another thing. God does not have a name. I cannot tell you These people, there are people that become obsessed with this name of God crap. I don't even understand that. That is bizarre to me. You know, it's like, oh, you can't call him Lord, that's not his name. You can't call him Jehovah, that's not his name. You can't call him this, you can't call him that. You have to call him his actual name. You ask him, well, what's his real name? And they can't tell you because they don't know what his real name is. And it's like a virus in their brain that they can't solve. They can't rectify it, and it kind of drives them a little bit nuts trying to find the name of God. And it's a little weird. God doesn't have a name. He's God. How is that hard to understand? He just is what we call him. We're the ones that come up with the name. That's crazy to me. People become obsessed with the name of God. He doesn't have a name. It's no problem. Just relax. Take it easy. It's not I am either. When he said I am, he's telling you he doesn't have a name. He's not saying I am is my name. He's saying I don't have a name. I am what I am. I can't believe people don't get this. Anyway. So I can see how people, they have the Creator God being God the Father, and then Jesus or Yahweh being God the Son. I can understand that. But where they go wrong is with the so-called Holy Spirit. Now this is a key point, because the Holy Spirit is the Word. And it is the same Word. Well, in John, where it says that God is the Word, that is the exact equivalent to in Genesis, where it says God said let there be light. You have God and light in Genesis chapter 1, and in John 1 you have Christ and the Word. Okay? The Word / the light is the Spirit. Okay? That is what is being used to create everything with. That is not a persona. It is a thing. And so this is where people go wrong with this Trinity. Not only is the Creator God not separate from Christ into two different beings, it is literally the same person. Elion, the Creator God, is controlling the vehicle of Christ, or Yahweh, depending on whether he's corporeal at the time or not. Or corporeal Yahweh is Jesus, and a non-corporeal Jesus is Yahweh. Both are controlled by Elion. As it's like driving a car. He's the one driving. It's the same person. Without anybody driving the car, it doesn't go anywhere. Elion's the driver. He's the pilot. He is the one that animates the body. It is him. But it is created to be in here with us. So it's not him, but he's the one controlling. I give the comparison to a video game of somebody controlling a character in a video game. We would then be non-player characters. Christ is the player character, and God is the player in that analogy. And I think that's a pretty good analogy. The Word is the light, and when it says light, it means that. It literally means light. Light is what makes everything what it is. Everything, all physical matter is made of light. It is compressed light, frozen light, corporeal light. in effect, basically, it is just simply super high energy light. It is when I would say, my theory is, it's when the wavelength becomes so incredibly small. I don't even know how to say this, really. I will find a way, eventually, a better way of saying this. A more concrete way. But there is a point, a certain size, a certain wavelength, like a distance between the two points in the wave. When it becomes so small, there's a certain point that when it gets smaller than that, it becomes corporeal. It literally becomes a particle, and it creates physical matter. It's like the difference between percussive audible sound, which are wavelengths, mechanical wavelengths, and then you have electromagnetic wavelengths, light, which you can see. You can see 1 octave of light 40 octaves higher than the sound that you can hear. And the same thing is true for light that becomes reality, light that becomes physical matter. It is the same step. I don't know how many octaves ahead of it is, higher than visible light, but it is the same process, the same comparison. You have audible sound, you have visible light, and then you have physical matter. And the elements, particles, my theory is the elements are actually arranged the same way that colors are, and that sound is in the octaves. Those would be your real particles. They are arranged in that harmonic of the same diatonic ratios. That will be there, present in the mass, in these particles, and in these atoms of the element. It's all about wavelength, and it's all about electromagnetism. This is how it is done. It is how it is made. It is projected into reality like a television screen, an old CRT monitor, or a projection TV. It projects the light, projects the image. The image moves, and you see it on the screen. We are essentially a multidimensional projection of creation. That's what we are. We are a projection of the Word of God into a construct that will register it and display it. At any moment, the universe is displaying the image of the will of God. That is what we see at the current time. At any given point in time, it is the will of God at that point. Time does not exist. It is an abstract concept. All we have is the ever-present now, and now is defined by the will of God at that time. Some people believe, and I used to believe this when I was a teenager, that God used the evolutionary process described by science to create mankind over a long course of billions of years of history and millions of years of evolution and natural selection. I cannot begin to describe how erroneous this is. However, creationists usually will say the earth is 6,000 years old because James Ussher calculated it to be that old about 400 years ago. He calculated that the creation of Adam was 4004 BC, and he equated that with the creation itself. But of course that is not correct either. Adam could have been created at any point after the beginning of creation. He does not have to be made. The problem is taking it to be 6 literal days or 7 literal days. And even they bring that into eschatology. They bring that into end time prophecy. Even by saying that there were 6 1,000-year period. Six periods of 1,000 years. And then there's a 7th period of 1,000 years, which they say is the millennial reign that John talked about in Revelation. The 7th day of rest, you see. Clearly, the creation story is an imaginative way of describing God making the world. I don't, to be honest with you, I do not hold anything to be accurate in the Bible, well, in Genesis, until you get down to Nimrod. Nimrod is about the first thing I would say that has historical value. I would say Nimrod is a real person, a real king. It would be debatable who that king would be. But then it goes to Abraham, and Abraham is a real person, as I said. If he isn't, then there is no religion. That's the whole point of the whole thing, is the covenant God made with Abraham. The Bible is the history of that covenant, the people of that covenant. Anyway, so the creation story, I don't give it too much weight. There is the gap theory that they try to bring into some people that try to age the earth and have it coincide more with science. We'll talk about the gap theory, which is basically, it's a more obvious solution by saying that Adam wasn't created at the same time that the universe was. 6 days later, after the universe was created. I've always thought that was stupid, that they would make it 6 literal days. So the gap theory says it could be any amount of time. It's an unknown, unspecified amount of time between the creation initially and Adam. And clearly that's the case. The earth has been around much longer than civilization. But I would not say 4 billion years. But clearly longer than 6,000. I don't know how long the earth has been around. I really don't have a clue. I personally estimate maybe 1 million. something close to that, approximating that. I would have dinosaurs. Dinosaurs would be between 50 and 100,000 years ago. Maybe not even that long. They have found dinosaurs with fleshy tissue still attached, not fossilized, actual bones, actual remains. You would not have fleshy, malleable tissue after 70 million years. It's an impossibility. And it's probably an impossibility after, I don't know, 10,000 years. So, I don't know. I would put them back. It's much closer. I don't think we can really know this for a fact. The age of such things as the dinosaurs. I would say it's much closer to 70,000 than 70 million. And I don't care what science says. Science doesn't know what. 100 years from now, science will be saying something completely different. I hate how they try to act like they fucking know everything. They don't know everything. They will act like they created the universe themselves in their certainty of how things operate when they tell you things. But they had that same certainty 100 years ago, and they will have that same certainty 100 years from now. And the only thing that'll be different is the truth they're trying to make everybody believe. Because it was never true. They're all full of shit. If any of them were half as smart as they think they are, they would admit they don't know everything. Their arrogance is really off-putting to me. They have built a house of cards. Science is not science anymore. It's a damn house of cards. Just because they can make a construct that is workable within itself doesn't prove it's true. It's a damn circular argument. The age of the dinosaurs, evolution, it's all a circular argument. Same as global warming, same as whatever, you name it. COVID even. It's all a circular argument with these guys. They build a house of cards and make you believe it. It's all about control. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The science has been co-opted by the globalists to control people with. It has become the new religion. It's just like the papacy was, the Catholic Church was, several hundred years ago. You have to conform or you are a heretic. Just like today with science, you have to conform or you are a quack and you cannot get, you can't get work. You become basically anathema in your chosen profession. Your name becomes mud, worthless. They control people through pressure. And that is not science. There have been reports of them destroying evidence, literally destroying evidence to the contrary of their official narrative. Anytime such evidence is reported to the authorities, anyhow, so I do not give much weight to the creation story in the Bible, in Genesis. I don't give much credence to the flood narrative, although the flood narrative does relate to certain things. You have Satan in the garden, the serpent Nakash, enchanting Eve, tricking her into taking the fruit, thus falling from grace. Then you have Adam. She goes to Adam and gets him to take the fruit, and he falls. This is an allegory, nothing more. You can read into it whatever you want. People do. People create, they'll read where it says God made them male and female first, and then later it says he made Eve out of his rib. This to them would be a second woman. So they have created a persona of the first one, which they call Lilith, and they have created an entire persona around her as being a feminist who would not submit to Adam and rejected him and ran off on her own, or ran off with some demon and became a succubus. And so they create these stories on their own. Some say that Satan or Lucifer or whoever this Nakash serpent was impregnated Eve, and that is where she got Cain from. And so Cain was what they call the serpent seed, and this began the lineage of what they refer to as Kenites, sons of Cain. This line of thinking is very similar to what is expressly stated in Genesis 6 as the precursor to the flood, the reason for the flood occurring in the first place, which is the sons of God marrying the daughters of men and having children with them. This is taken to be fallen angels mating with humans, creating Nephilim. And then the flood was sent to destroy the Nephilim and these fallen angels. The counter-argument is that the sons of God are the sons of Adam, and the sons of men, or the daughters of men, are the daughters of Cain, who had been cursed and set to wander. However, when Cain was set to wander, it said he found people already there. Of course, this is because this is not how this story happened anyway. This is not how creation happened in the first place. So you're going to find anomalies, because this is not, it's not depicting reality. What we have then is what would be the Timaean version, which would be the original demons who are not fallen angels, the original race of what we would call ETs today, are demons. They are, some would say, reptilian. I don't have a problem with that, but some people do. Doesn't really matter. But they were the original race of inhabitants on this earth. Until God made humans, I would say Caucasians, that the Adamic race is the Caucasian race. It came first. The reptilians, or the Anunnaki as some people call them, even though that's a misnomer, because the Anunnaki were minor gods in the Babylonian pantheon. The name does mean from heaven to earth, though, so people like to connect that with space, because they came from heaven or space to earth. And so they make that connection, and they like the name. The name has become synonymous with Nephilim. So it just is. It's part of the thing. It's not technically accurate, but it's just what everybody calls them now. They call them Anunnaki. So it is what it is. It doesn't matter what they are called. They are the precursor race to humans. They had a covenant with God. They had a priest class. They had their own law, their own law of God, I mean. And they had their own priest, their own Melchizedek, or Pope, if you will. Lucifer was the Melchizedek of the what I refer to as Nagas, using the Hindu word for them, or the lizard people from the inside of the earth. So I refer to them as Nagas. But they had their own priesthood, and what we call Lucifer, or what we think of as Satan, was basically their pope. And they're not fallen angels. I don't personally believe in angels. I have not seen any evidence that they exist. And so these Nagas begin to, now what had happened was, see, God had given, because they had begun, I guess what they had done is broken their covenant, is what it is. They had fallen away. And just as he did later on with Israel, he divorced them. Okay, so he made Adam, the being, the first white human, which would be synonymous, analogous to Adam. Although, of course, Adam would not have been his name, but it's what we call the first man. So it's just whoever this guy was, he is Adam. And so you have them, and they start making these people. Okay, they start reproducing, they start having a clan, whatever you want to call it. The Nagas take them, they start experimenting on them, they start doing genetic modifications and making other types of humans and other types of abominations, non-humans. And this is the fall of man, is the genetic modifications of people. Okay. And so you don't have any of the original people left, the original humans, which I would contend, it's my belief, that they were the original giants, the red-headed giants. They were always white. Giants are always white. You don't have African giants. You don't have Chinese giants. You don't have Australian giants. They're always white giants. They always have, or quite often have, red hair. But I'm not talking 8-foot giants. I'm talking 12, 14-foot giants. They're always white. They are the progenitor of the current Caucasian race, and I believe they are the original Adamic race. And they ended up becoming later on vilified, because everything becomes twisted under the control of the dark forces. They turn everything backwards on its head. It took me a long time to figure that out, that the Nephilim are actually not evil. That the giants, which were killed off systematically over time, are actually the original Adamic race. And that is precisely why they were killed off. The shorter people, the hobbits, you might say, are we are the fallen race. We are the fallen humanity. Also, this is where Bigfoot came from, and all of the monsters in Greek mythology are likely to not having existed themselves necessarily, but they are referring back to a time in which this kind of genetic modification of living organisms was going on. And in fact, it is a theory of mine that the dinosaurs themselves could have been a version of this, an earlier version of this kind of genetic modification. They were probably doing it for eons. But anyway, so the flood narrative is to kill off the Nagas. That is what the flood would have been about, if it was there at all. Whatever kind of global catastrophes have happened, there have been many. Many cultures talk about them. I know the Hopi, Navajo stories talk about there being various calamities in the past that destroyed a big chunk of humanity. So the dinosaurs would have been one of these what science would call extinction events. Really they are, in religious terms, judgment, global destruction, judgment of God, to eradicate things that God does not want on the planet in the first place. Anyway, what Adam had done, if you want to make any kind of sense out of the Adam and Eve narrative, it would be that basically Eve was taken hostage, was ransomed back to Adam, because God had given the Melchizedek priesthood over to Adam. Adam then owned the earth. He was king of the earth. Adam was king of earth at that time. But Lucifer, Satan, whatever you want to call him, caused him to give it back. And so he ransomed his wife, Eve, to get it. At that point, Lucifer became king of the earth again. These Nagas are said to live a long time, thousands of years. It is possible. I consider it speculative, but then again, all of this is speculative. But this would be what I write in my Old Testament. This is my version. This is my Genesis, the Timaean Genesis. So it would be, I suppose, taken with the same speculative lens. I consider to be much more accurate than Genesis, and much more accurate than science would tell you, because science is given to you by the enemy, so you have to consider the source. Anyway, so I don't know. I don't think the flood was a global flood that wiped everything out, and the killing off of the animals is ridiculous. Killing off of the hybrids and the genetic abominations that were created would be one thing, but you don't need a flood for that. And killing off of the Nagas, I think, became what Peter describes later on in the New Testament as the chained demons or the bound demons in Tartarus. I think these Naga creatures, these beings, were sent to another dimension by God, which later became thought of as hell or Hades or Tartarus, all of the same thing. Hell is another topic that is greatly misunderstood, but it's not even an Old Testament doctrine. Hell is basically contained entirely to the New Testament. I'll get to that when I get to it, I guess, if I continue going on through time here. There's a lot to talk about in Genesis, though, more than most of the other books. what the flood event is referring to, apart from what I just spoke of, is essentially the Atlantis myth. The flooding of the earth is the same exact thing as Atlantis sinking. Atlantis did not sink. The flood came up and overran it. It was Atlantis. After long deliberation on the topic, I have come to the conclusion that Atlantis was the Mediterranean world during the pre-flood times. The flood is itself not a global flood that killed everything off. What it was a raising of the sea level, which flooded all the coastal cities at the time and basically destroyed the maritime civilization of Atlantis, which it would obviously be a Mediterranean type of civilization in that part of the world. It was not super high tech. They weren't building flying saucers and traveling in time and any kind of crazy stuff like that, but it was more like a proto-Greek type civilization, very much like the Greco-Roman style of life, architecture. They had the old pillars. There are ruins that are ancient even to the ancient Greeks, and they referred to the builders as the Pelasgians, people from the sea. It is conjectured that it means people from the sea. It's not exactly known what the name refers to, but they were called the Pelasgians, and they were the hypothetical people that predated the Greeks that built the ruins, the cities that became the ruins, that were all around the Greeks at that time. And these would have been the civilization of the Atlanteans. I think it's fairly clear. And history, it just becomes erased by the official narrative, and I hate that. There's also some idea that it could be the Thracians were the original white people, the original, like the oldest version of the Caucasian race. The Adamic race would come from Thrace, or Thrace, as some people say. But I have not looked into that very much, but it is an idea that intrigues me. Because I can see that, I can see those people becoming the Pelasgians over time. But anyway. The lineage of Adam, the Melchizedek lineage, goes from father to son. They are the priests of Yahweh. They represent him on the earth. They are the kings of the earth. There's only ever one at a time, and it goes from father to son. And so Abel was supposed to be the Melchizedek, as it is shown in the story. Everybody knows Cain killed Abel because he was jealous. Cain was the firstborn. He thought he should have it, but it was given to Abel, and then he killed him because of it. And then Cain was cursed, and he was set away to live on his own. And he went and found some other people to live with in a faraway land. Then Adam and Eve had a third son, Seth, and that is then he became the Melchizedek, and it continued on through him, going down through the generations, down through Enoch and Methuselah and Lamech, down to Noah. And then from then you go to his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then you get into the crazy idea that I was taught as a child, that the three sons of Noah gave us the three races of man. The Caucasians or Europeans, the black Africans, and then the Asians, which they actually just mean Semitic, Middle Easterners. They don't actually mean like Asians from China, because that wasn't even in the worldview of people writing at the time. They weren't even thinking about actual, what we call Asians now. To them, the Middle East was Asia. They did not really have a concept of anything much farther away than that, much farther east than that. So it's kind of funny that their third race is actually the Middle Eastern race, the Arabic race, which is in effect an amalgam of the actual three races. The idea of a man having three different races for children is absolutely asinine. With the same two parents having three different races of children. I mean, this is just gobbledygook. That's what they told me as a child, though. As a Christian child, they tell you crap like that. So clearly that's not what happened, but as I said before, the other races were created, including the current white race is itself a de-evolved version of the original white race, the giant race. But they were all, all the races current now, including the ones, there were other races that have died out, that have gone extinct, or have been mixed into the other greater populations. Like the elongated skulls, that was one of the races. They also had red hair. They're from Russia. But there were more races than that we have now. They've all kind of become, over time, certain ones have become homogenized with other ones and absorbed into greater populations and then disappeared. Kind of like American natives have become kind of absorbed into the Caucasian or European immigrant population. And what looks like may happen to the white race here, if the Hispanic race keeps flooding in, they will overpopulate us, and we will be absorbed into them if it keeps going that way. But yeah, so the Native American population is basically all but gone now through mixing, being absorbed, and that has happened to other races in the past that have just gone away over time. But they all have their origin to the genetic experiments and modifications done by the Nagas thousands of years ago. Like 20,000 years ago or something. 30,000, whatever. Anyway, what it was is there's a theory I have come across. Well, about Nimrod, actually. Nimrod being... There's a myth in Egypt about Osiris and Isis. And Osiris dying, by being killed by Seth, or Set, the evil god. And he killed Osiris and cut him into 14 parts. And Isis found, she went and hunted down all the body parts that were sent around to different cities, and she put him back together, which is why Osiris is the iconography for Osiris is a mummy, because he was bandaged back up. His dead body was put back together like Frankenstein, and he was bandaged up. So his iconography is a mummy. He's a lord of the dead. But she could not find his phallus, and so she had to fashion one for him out of gold, I think. So when you see pictures of Osiris, he has this erect phallus, which is actually like, it's not even a real phallus. It's just it's a phallus that's always erect because it's fake. But anyway, she is said to have impregnated herself and given birth to this to Horus. And this is analogous. This is the same myth of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. But there was, in my mind, a comparison between Ham and Shem. How does this go? I've almost forgotten this. It's been a while since I thought about it. Seems like Ham's son. Ham had a son called Kish, and Kish had a son, Asher, or Asher. His name was Asher. There is a city in Babylon, in the Babylonian kingdom, called Kish. And the Assyrians their namesake comes from their god Asher, which would be the same thing as Asher, and I would say the same thing as Osiris. And so this scenario became sort of revealed to me, that Nimrod is this Asher or Osiris, and that Ham is his grandfather. Ham would be the equivalent of Shamash, the sun god. Shamash is very nearly the same name as Shem. It's even referred to in the Bible as Shemesh. They translate the word Shem means name, and so they often translate it as such, except it's crazy to me that somebody's name would be the word in a language, the language that they speak, the word. They would name a kid the word for name. You're not going to name your son the word name. That is insane to me. But it is what is said. Now this is highly... When I was at Jim's one time, I went to Jim's one time and he said that him and Mike had been up the previous night and they had counted all the names. They had done the gematria work for all the names from Adam down through the lineage all the way to Jacob, from father to son down to Jacob. And then when they got to Jacob, they used the name Israel instead, because God changed Jacob's name to Israel, where the name Israel comes from. And if you add up all the names in that lineage and use the name Israel instead of Jacob, they all add up exactly to 7,000 in Hebrew gematria. Cannot be an accident. And this tells me, it tells them, it told them that God had orchestrated these events for that to be happening, for that to be the case, that he had planned it ahead so far in advance that their names would add up to 7,000. But to me, when I see that, I see that you had some rabbis sitting over in Babylon when they were finalizing Genesis, and they wrote their names to do that. And so when they write somebody's name like Shem, when they say that his name is the word name, which is what the word Shem is. That's ridiculous to me. However, it's very close to Shemesh or Shamash in Babylonian, the sun god, which would be the same thing as the Melchizedek. Shem was the Melchizedek, but Ham wanted to be the Melchizedek, same as Cain did. And so he went, just like Cain did. They founded the city. The city was Kish, that had his son's name. So that's there. I haven't heard anybody say it, but it's there. That connection is there. So to me, there's something connecting Ham with Shamash, the sun god, and to me that's him deifying himself and making, well, there's something else I forgot about, I haven't mentioned yet, is that after the flood you didn't have any more giants, but that the Melchizedek lineage before this were giants, okay? And so after the flood you had some of these lingering around, and these were deified. The giants were deified after the flood. That's it. That's what I'm talking about here, okay? And so Ham was deified as Shamash in Babylon. He became the Babylonian equivalent of the Melchizedek in Salem, Jerusalem, even though you can only have one at a time. There. I forgot about that. I had to talk about it for a minute before it came back to me. But that's what was going on. And then Nimrod, as his name is in the Bible, there's actually a city called Nimrod as well. But it's my belief he was actually Asar, or Asar, or Hebrew Asher, from which the Assyrians come. And whoever the Assyrians are named after is the same thing that Osiris is named after. Okay, Osiris is referring to Nimrod. And the same thing is true with Asar. However, the story about him being cut up, I think, goes back to Shem and Ham. I think it was Ham that was the one that was mutilated and had his body cut up. But it could have been Nimrod. It doesn't really matter. But my point is, Shem was the one that did it. And he would have cut his body into 7 parts and sent the 7 parts to the 7 cities of Babylon. Well, it would have been Sumer at the time. 7 cities of Sumer. Anyway, people don't normally like to think about their holy men like that, but that's because people are wrong. Anyway, I still wonder who Nimrod would have been. But like I said, it's pretty much the first thing that the Bible talks about that actually has some kind of historical tangibility. After this, you have Abraham, who was a priest of some Babylonian city. Would have been a Babylonian cult of one of their gods. Each Babylonian city or Sumerian city, they had ziggurats built to their patron deity at that city, and so Abraham would have belonged to one of the cults, the cult of whichever god was the patron of the city he came from. But then he was called to leave, so he left. It says he went to Haran first, and he says he brought his family with him and his father. And then he went back down. Well, you can't cut across the desert. You have to go up the river, up to Haran, and then back down the coast, down into Palestine. So if you're going to Jerusalem, you can't just really cut across the desert. That would not be advisable. So they followed the river up and then back down where water is. You got to follow the water, follow the greenery, follow the food. Anyway, so he makes his way to Salem. He's going back, I would say, to visit the Melchizedek, because this is Shem now. It's called the Melchizedek in the Bible, and people make a big deal about it, but Melchizedek is his title. But the persona that it is at the time Abraham gets to him is still Shem. Only by this time he's very old, and he's basically getting close to dying. He can no longer perform his Melchizedek duties, and so it's time to pass it on. He may well have sent for Abraham, or Abraham's father, or whoever it would have been there in that Babylonian city. He may well have sent for him to bring him there, reaching out to the extended family, because it jumps over from Shem to Abraham is a good number of generations. It's not his grandson. It's like 10 generations down the road, because Shem, being a giant from before the flood, he's living a long time. It says about 600 by the time he dies. Noah was 600 at the flood. He lived to be 950, I think it said. Shem was only around about 100 years before the flood, and so he only lives to be 600. Anyway, so we're down to the end of his life, and Abraham comes to see him, and the whole point of him going there was to have the Melchizedek priesthood transferred to him. He became the next one, skipping over all these guys in between. They would have all been dead by then, because they weren't living. Everybody born after the flood didn't live that long anymore. If you go by the biblical narrative. And the Timaean reason for this would be because they were part of the devolved, fallen race of humans, not the giants who still had proper genetics. Anyway, so he gives it to him, and he dies. Shem dies, and then Abraham is the Melchizedek. And then that starts his journey. Next thing you have Babylon. It's a story about Babylon wanting tribute from the cities of the plain, including Sodom and Gomorrah. But they refuse, and after several years of their refusal, because they had already been sending tribute, which was a thing back in the ancient world, to send tribute to your patron city or mother city, the metropolis, and same with Rome later on. But so they stopped paying tribute to Babylon. After several years, Babylon sent armies after them. Abraham, it clearly states in Genesis, Abraham went and fought with them against Babylon in this war, which eventually resulted in the independence of these cities around the Dead Sea, the so-called cities of the plain, including Sodom and Gomorrah, which everybody knows about. But nobody ever talks about Abraham fighting in these wars, or these battles. Anyway, I don't have much to say about Sodom and Gomorrah, other than that's clearly showing you what God thinks about homosexuality. At least if you take the Bible to be accurately depicting God's intentions, which I do. Like I said before, it was written by people who were elect, written by people who were, they had the Spirit. They weren't right about everything. but they weren't wrong either, necessarily. They were right when they were right, and they were wrong when they were wrong. And I can certainly see God destroying a city full of homosexuals. That's very much in his purview. That's what he does. Anyway, basically the Melchizedek lineage was passed from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. Jacob, as far as I can tell, was the last one until Christ. The Melchizedek lineage went down through the lineage of Judah, the lineage of kings. Although David and Solomon were not Melchizedeks, they were kings of Israel. And it went all the way through them, all the way down to Christ. He was a Melchizedek. And that's the lineage it will follow. It did not follow the lineage of priests, the Levites. And the Levite priesthood, basically, I'm not even certain it was ever legit. If you want to be perfectly honest about it, I'm not sure it was ever even legit. Clearly, Christ atoned for the people himself. And Hebrews, the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, clearly identifies him as a priest in the order of Melchizedek. This is saying that the Melchizedek priesthood trumps the Levitical priesthood, and may well be saying the Levitical priesthood was void, was null and void. Certainly it was null and void at the time Christ did that, because the Ark of the Covenant wasn't even in the temple in the first place for sacrifices to be made. They could not be made since the Babylonian invasion in 586 BC. So the whole religion was a sham for 500 years before Christ, and continues to be one till this day. They hid the ark in the caves under the temple when the Babylonians were coming to invade them, to protect the ark. But it was never recovered. At least not by the time that the Romans destroyed the temple later on. It was never recovered by that time. It may have been recovered later on after that, but it wasn't recovered before that point. So the whole duration from 586 up until 70 AD, Judaism was a sham. Christ took care of that. You have to have the ark. Without it, you don't have anything. Not under the Mosaic law. You have to have the ark. Also, you have to have the presence of God, which was not there either. The presence of God presumably would go where the ark went. And the ark wasn't there. Ezekiel chapter 10 talks about them carrying the ark out of the temple, and it is the departing of the glory of God from the temple with the ark. That's what that's talking about. Anyhow, there's not a whole lot to say about Abraham. He was the one God made the covenant with in the first place, to restore the white race, to restore us back to our original selves. And thus begins the long story of history. It will not be completed until Christ returns and destroys the world for good, resets it up, makes a new heaven and a new earth, as it says. He will melt, he comes back and he melts everything down. He melts it all back into the earth, including the people, killing billions of people. And he then restores it to a new Edenic state, the way it's meant to be, and puts his elect people back in there, and they begin to repopulate the planet again, and it begins what we call the kingdom. This is the kingdom age. And this is when our genetics are what we would consider to be restored, and our new, what they call glorified bodies. Although I never have really liked that term, glorified body. It's just what they should be anyway. It's what they're supposed to be. It's our pure genetics. Our genetics are severely degraded. Which brings me to another point. Maybe I should have mentioned earlier in the creation of man part. Everybody, Christians think that this body doesn't matter. You are a soul, and this body is just like just a vehicle for you, and it doesn't matter. But it does matter, and the reason it matters, and I used to think that too, that our bodies don't matter, but they do. They do reflect us. Our bodies, they are us. A human, our soul cannot be put into some other body. That's not how it works. We are tied to our bodies. Our body, every time Christ comes into corporeal form, he looks the same, because that is his spiritual nature, given a physical appearance. It is a physical representation of himself. You don't just make yourself be however you want to look. I don't know how to say it. I'm trying to think of a way to say this. Anyway, we are made of energy, light, the Word of God. Everything is made of it. Our bodies are created. Our DNA determines what our bodies are. Our DNA is a helix. The helix is a spiral. That spiraling DNA strand is itself an antenna to pick up the frequencies of light, which is to say the Word of God. Our entire genetic structure is based on receiving the Word of God, which is the creative, generative force of the cosmos, of creation, of reality. Okay? We are designed, our bodies are literally designed to pick up the energies emanating from God. The energy that is being broadcast to us, for us to exist, is what we are. That is our name. That energy that creates us, sustains us in this moment. Our DNA picks it up. Our DNA is what makes us who we are. In other words, what I'm saying is the two work in tandem. It's like a radio and a receiver, the signal and the receiver. Okay? They go together. You can't have one without the other. Our DNA that makes us who we are is being built by the very thing it picks up. You follow me? It's like a CD, a CD with instructions in it on how to make a CD player. It's a bit of a paradox. It's kind of like proteins in our genetics. That's why proteins the proteins are one of the things that disprove evolution. But anyway, our bodies are created by this light and the DNA. The DNA picks up the light. It's the light that does it. But our DNA has to be what it is for the light to work. It's like the DNA is the physical representation of what the light is in spirit. It's just the physical form of it. Therefore, our bodies are the physical form of it. The light that creates us. You can't have the light creating us and our body be anything else. If it were, then we would be somebody else, because it would be making a different person. People want to think that they are not their bodies. So you get this idea of soul swapping. There's no such thing happening. Lucifer has been the Melchizedek of this planet, or somebody filling in for Lucifer. If not Lucifer directly, the same Nakash that originally was given the rights to the planet by Adam, a certain contract. If it is not the same person, then it is someone else in a succession of people filling in that role of running the planet, being king of the planet, as it is said in the New Testament. Satan is the god of this world. It actually says that, and it's not. That is true. That is a true statement. He is the ruler of this world at this time. For as long as that contract is active, Christ will not return until that contract is up. The time is running out. It will not last forever, which is why they are trying to grab in the 20th century and the 21st century, the rise of communism. They're trying to grab all the control. They're trying to suck everybody's soul out of them, brainwash them, full of all this anti-human, anti-God, anti-reality, anything that is wrong. They are systematically trying to erase and subvert everything that is good in the world and good in people, and replace it with something that is not good, something that is harmful to people, harmful to the earth, harmful to humanity. They are breaking us down by design and separating us from God on purpose. And they are doing that because the time is at hand. Their time is running out. However, people need to know why things are the way they are. The Christian world is coming to an end because Christians aren't Christian anymore, and they can't put it together. Christians have just become goofy, and they don't fight anymore. They just acquiesce and give in. And it's like the Byzantine Empire, just shrinking, constantly shrinking. It's sad to see. But the silver lining is that it is showing us that we are closer to Christ. And that's the only way out. Until last year, I was hoping we could stave off the inevitable. But since last year, I have realized that people just do not have enough fight in them. The enemy has 10 times more fight in them than the side of good. Literally, it's like they're just sitting on their porch in a rocking chair, watching the clouds go by. Evil never sleeps, and these bastards are stealing the planet out from under us. And they're not sitting on any porch. I said I wanted to go chronologically, but it seems that I can't strictly contain myself to a straight narrative. Not much is to be said. About Abraham, other than there was a person that God made that covenant with. He would have been a Caucasian. The Caucasians have been everywhere. They founded the Indus Valley civilization. They founded Egypt. Probably founded Sumer. So the farther back you go, the more south Caucasians were over in the Middle East. Just a few hundred years ago, Europeans were in Turkey. They were still considered a Greek/Roman area, all the way up until 1453. Only since then has it become an Arabic nation. It doesn't belong to them, it belongs to the Greeks. Now they're trying to take over Greece too. They are insidious. I cannot stand them. I literally cannot stand the Muslims. Just the Arabic people, whether they're Muslim or not. But they basically all are. I just hate their insidious, the insidious way in which they are spreading their genetics around the globe. I just hate that concept anyway, no matter what their race. The races should not be spreading everywhere. There again, it's by design, by the globalists, by the evil forces, on purpose, to undermine the genetic purity of the races. They're using the vanity of the so-called minorities to even do it. Another reason why I don't like them. They are not intelligent enough to realize when they're having their ego appealed to. They're being played by having their ego manipulated, because they can then they're using their genetics to destroy white people. So they actually get off on the idea of destroying white people by spreading their genetics around. But what they're really doing is lessening their own genetics in doing so. They're breaking both of the genetics down into something new, something different. If they really cared about their races, they would stay where they are and keep their purity, and keep their heritage and their culture. Not give in to the globalist bastards who are destroying everybody. Anyway, I keep getting sidetracked. Yes, Abraham was the one, whoever he was, that God made the covenant with. About the white race. No other race. It was a contingent, not even the whole white race. That's something else no one talks about. It's only a part of the white race, not the whole thing. That's what the Jews always were. They were a part of the white race. The Europeans. That's why I don't have a problem with the Ashkenazi Jews now, but it's also why Paul went to Europe when he was going to spread the religion and open it back up to the world. He was opening it up to the white race that Abraham had come from in the first place. He did not open it up to the entirety of the planet Earth. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a point for a covenant in the first place, since it's for everybody. You don't need a covenant with everybody. Just tell them that's just make it open. You don't need a covenant with everybody. You need a covenant. The reason it's a covenant is because it's not for everybody. It's specific to certain people. That's why it's a testament or a covenant. Or you could say contract. If it was for everybody, it would not be a contract. It would just be an open invitation. The whole point that it is a covenant shows you that it is not for everybody. Else there would be no need for Abraham in the first place. Anyway, the story of Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and going into Egypt and then coming back out of Egypt, I think is really neither here nor there. There is some conjecture as to who Joseph was in Egyptian history. There was an Egyptian pharaoh named Yaqub Har, which I think maybe Jacob was the name Yaqub. Which is the Arabic name even now for Jacob. The Arabic version of that name is Yaqub. Anyway, then we get on down to Moses. This is about 1400 BC. People obviously making the obvious connection with Akhenaten, the monotheistic pharaoh of Egypt, who did away with the Egyptian pantheon and replaced it with the Aten, the sun disk. And although I don't think that Moses was Akhenaten, because their personalities do not seem to be the same. Akhenaten, being a pharaoh of Egypt, is a well enough known character in history. If Moses were that person, then they would have been able to, I don't know, it would be more clear that it were him, if it were him, I guess is what I'm saying. I think Moses might have been a priest of the Aten cult, him and his brother Aaron. And then when Akhenaten died, the cult of Aten would have been run out of Egypt, basically, and while all the statues and of Akhenaten were being defaced, and all of his occurrences of his name were being blotted out, chiseled out of the statues and whatnot. They were basically erasing him from history as best they could, and the people of the cult of Aten would have been, they would have probably been wanting to get out of town. And so I see a similarity, and it is my own hypothesis, that the Levites, the Hebrews in the desert, are equivalent to what would later become the Levites, and they were fleeing Egypt persecution because they were Atenists and not of one of the other cults of the Egyptian pantheon that they reverted back to afterwards. And then you don't have any 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob, through 4 different wives. What you've got is one tribe of priests, which became the Levites, led by Moses, who fled Egypt, went through Midian, came up to Canaan, and joined with the tribes that were already there. There is no evidence of any kind of invasion, any kind of war going on, cities being taken, Jericho falling. No evidence of that at all. What it seems to be is a peaceful migration and just a simple merging of various family tribes. And so the Levites would have been one of these, and they just would have merged in and become one of those tribes. And then they created this legal system, the law of Moses, based around the Melchizedek ideas, the Melchizedek ways, but fusing it with the Atenist ritualism, let's say. Also, the Ark of the Covenant itself may well have been Egyptian. They have found Egyptian arks with Egyptian gods on them, and the ark may well have been actually Egyptian, and they may have carried it out with them, or they would have made one in a similar fashion after they left. So like I was saying, the Levitical priesthood may have never been functioning, or shall we say functionally acceptable to God. That it would have only ever been the Melchizedeks, and it went to the king lineage. That was remembered by Christ long, long after the covenant had been, the real covenant, had been forgotten. Because they, just like the Jews do today with their Talmud, always rewriting things and redefining it, re-explaining it. It is a hypothesis of mine that the Torah itself may have been the original Talmud. In other words, the original codification of a system that was much, much older than Melchizedek's system. But that it wasn't just a codification of it, it was actually a perversion of it as well. Same as the Talmud is a perversion of the Torah. It is quite likely that the Torah is itself a perversion of the Melchizedek ways, which is to say, following the Spirit, which is what the apostles did after Christ died. Atonement came, and then the Spirit was bestowed on the people. They began following the Spirit again. That's a beautiful thing. Over time it becomes codified as it was in church dogma, and then people are banned from following the Spirit, because when they do, they become heretical, and so then they are treated as such. And after so long a time of dogma, we then have to have a schism yet again, over and over, people rejecting the dogma, rejecting the codification, and following the Spirit once again. It's almost as if by codifying it, by writing it down itself is the problem. And it becomes inevitably taken over by people who don't have the Spirit in them in the first place and don't know the difference, and they just turn it into some kind of legalism, some kind of dogma, and just things you have to do, things you have to say, actions you have to take, perform, and it's not the Spirit anymore. It's just actions that you do, things that you do, or dogmas that you're supposed to believe, like taking the Eucharist, or wearing a phylactery on your head, or eating a certain kind of bread during certain festivals. It's ridiculous what people do. They think it's their religion that they're supposed to do. What the hell does breaking a wine glass have to do with people getting married? Or having a cake? It's a little bit ridiculous, these traditions of man. Not one of them are necessary. And I guess that's what Timaeanism is all about, is cutting out the crap and getting back down to what is necessary. What is the faith? The faith is following the Spirit. Anyway. Yeah, so that's about what Moses is about. The core of the law is atonement. That part of the law is not both. That is the core. That's the main part. That is what the Melchizedeks always did. They always did the atonement. That's what Adam did. When Adam didn't do it. God did the first one, showing him how to do it. When they told him they were naked, and he said, "Who told you were naked?" And then he took an animal, probably a lamb or a goat, and skinned it, killed it and skinned it, and gave them. They had already made clothes for themselves. They had already covered themselves, it said, with leaves, which is to say cloth. You could replace that with plant material. You could just say cloth, clothing. Clothing itself comes from the word cloth. Cloth is plant fibers. He didn't say that. They covered themselves with plant material, and just like we do now. That wasn't good enough. God killed an animal, spilled the blood, took the skin, and made clothes for them to wear out of the hide of the animal. This was atonement. That was the first act of atonement in the Bible, done by God Himself, Christ, as the incarnate Christ. It's what Abel was doing. It's what Noah was doing when there was the rainbow. People don't realize that when it said Cain offered his vegetables and God rejected it, but he accepted Abel's sacrifice. That was because it was an atonement sacrifice. He was the Melchizedek. You can't make an atonement sacrifice with vegetables. But that's what Noah was doing. They were doing all these sacrifices because they were the Melchizedek. So the atonement, it had to have been maintained in the Levitical code, the Torah, because it was what the Melchizedeks did in the first place. That was the one thing in the Torah that the Melchizedeks did to begin with. The dietary law was added in. That was not there originally. Pretty much most of it wasn't there to begin with. I'm trying to think what else might have been there. I guess that's good enough for now. But yeah, the story of the Torah, the story of Moses is what I'm talking about. The story of Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. That's basically all superfluous, same as Joshua and Judges and all of this business. None of that really matters till you get down to David and Solomon and the kings. All of this business, it's all just made up. That whole story arc after that whole arc of from leaving Egypt, but especially from when they get to the Joshua taking over the land by force, and then the judges, this is all fiction to me. And this again would be heresy to Christians that have to have the Bible be accurate and the inerrant Word of God. But it's how it is. I should say that it has been well, there is the guy Ron Wyeth, who claims to have found the point in the Gulf of Aqaba where the chariots of the Pharaoh's army fell into the water, was taken over by the water, chasing after the Israelites. But then he also claims to have found the Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat. Well, alright. I guess that's it for this. I guess I'll make this part 1. And I'll cut it off here and I will talk to you later. Take it easy.